The envelope was already open when Silvana walked into the boardroom. That detail mattered later. It mattered in ways nobody in that room could have anticipated, least of all Silvana Mercer Obi, 37-year-old wife of Clifford Obi, who stood at the threshold in a grey wool blazer and watched her husband hold up a document she had never authorized him to touch. He didn't see her yet. Neither did the 7 people seated around the long mahogany table, his business partners, his investors, 2 attorneys, and Clifford's father, Edmund Obi, 68 years old and never in his life shy about taking up space. Edmund was the one talking. He was always the one talking. The Vantage Group acquisition, Edmund said, spreading his hands open like a man offering a gift to the room, is already secured. My son has the preliminary agreement right here, signed and ready. Clifford nodded. He was 41, broad-shouldered, with the kind of calm confidence that people who had never been truly tested often wore without knowing it was borrowed. He set the document on the table. Silvana recognized it immediately. It was from Mercer Holdings, her company. She had not signed that document. She had drafted it, reviewed it, and then quietly shelved it 3 weeks ago when she decided the terms no longer served her interests. The document Clifford was presenting to a room full of investors as a zeal deal was a draft, an internal draft, one that had never left her office, or so she had believed. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The soft click was enough. Clifford turned first. His expression moved through several rooms in the span of a second. Surprise, confusion, something that tried to be a smile and didn't quite make it. Silvana. He said her name, the way people say a word they suddenly aren't sure how to spell. Edmund looked up. His face did something different. It tightened. I didn't know you were joining us today, Clifford said. He was already moving toward her, one hand extended, the kind of gesture a man makes when he wants to redirect traffic. I wasn't planning to, Silvana said, but I received a notification that someone accessed my secure document server at 11:47 last night. She looked at the paper on the table. Now I understand why. Nobody spoke. She walked to the table and picked up the document. She didn't look at Clifford when she did it. She looked at Edmund, who was watching her the way a man watches a storm he was certain wouldn't reach him. This is a draft, she said. It was never finalized. It was never authorized. And it was certainly never meant to be presented to anyone as a binding agreement. One of the attorneys, a woman named Hargrove she'd seen at 2 previous meetings, cleared her throat. Mrs. Obi. Mercer, Silvana said without heat. Silvana Mercer. Mercer Holdings is my company. It was my company before this marriage, and it will be my company after whatever conversation we're about to have. She set the document back on the table, face down. I think the meeting is over. But that morning was not where the story began. It began the way most slow disasters begin, quietly, with small things that didn't seem connected. Silvana had married Clifford Obi 4 years ago in a ceremony at a vineyard in Sonoma. She'd been 33. He had been charming, attentive, and ambitious in the way she found genuinely attractive. Not reckless ambition, but the careful kind, the kind that makes plans and follows through. He was building a mid-sized real estate development firm. She was already running Mercer Holdings, a private investment group her mother had founded in 1989, and passed to Silvana piece by piece starting when Silvana was 26. She had not hidden who she was, but she hadn't advertised it either. Mercer Holdings was not a household name. It operated quietly, the way old money tends to operate, through subsidiaries, through investment arms, through a web of companies whose parent wasn't printed on the door. The firm managed close to $2.4 billion in assets. Silvana sat on 4 boards. She employed 340 people across 6 states. Clifford knew she had money. He thought it was the comfortable kind, the kind that meant a nice apartment in D.C., a car that didn't give problems, and maybe a vacation home eventually. The kind of wealth that made life easier without making it strange. He did not know about the portfolio. He did not know about the 4 board seats. He did not know that the Whitfield Tower he had pitched his firm to develop 3 years ago had been quietly acquired by a Mercer Holdings subsidiary 6 months before his pitch landed on anyone's desk. She hadn't told him because there had never been a moment that felt right. Then too much time passed, and the omission grew into something heavier than a secret. It became a test she hadn't meant to set, but couldn't bring herself to end. She watched him in those years. She watched how he treated the people he thought had less power than he did. The assistant he dismissed in 2-word emails, the contractor he stiffed on a payment and called a misunderstanding, the junior associate at his firm, a young woman named Talia, who left after 6 months and never explained why. Silvana had noticed. She had filed things away the way she filed everything, without urgency, without confrontation, just quietly in a place she could retrieve them. She loved him. That was the honest thing. She had loved him, or she had loved who he was on the days he was trying. There were those days too, days when he was warm and present and made her laugh until her stomach hurt. Days when he looked at her like she was the most interesting person he'd ever been in a room with. But those days had gotten further apart. She noticed it first in the way he spoke about her to his father. Edmund Obi had never liked Sylvana. He'd never said so directly. He was too careful for that, but it came through in the texture of every conversation. He called her your wife when speaking to Clifford, never by name. He asked questions about her little investment thing, with a smile that meant the opposite of curiosity. He once, at a family dinner, suggested that Clifford needed to be making more of the financial decisions in their marriage. Clifford had laughed it off. Sylvana had not laughed. She had noted it. The first concrete thing she found was a phone bill, not snooping. She had never been a person who checked phones or read messages over shoulders, but their accounts were linked, and she saw the bill the same afternoon it came through, the same way she saw every other household expense. A number appeared 17 times in 1 month. She didn't recognize it. She looked it up. It belonged to a woman named Brinley Foss, 29 years old, who worked as a consultant for one of Clifford's development partners. Sylvana sat with that information for 3 days before she did anything with it. Then she called someone she trusted, a private investigator named Augustus Cole, who had worked with Mercer Holdings on due diligence matters for a decade. She did not feel good about it. She felt methodical. Those are different things. Augustus came back to her 6 weeks later with a folder. She read it at her desk at 7 in the morning, alone, with a cup of coffee that went cold. Clifford and Brinley had been seeing each other for 14 months. They had taken 2 trips together, one to Chicago, one to Miami. He had paid for both using a credit card she didn't have access to, one he'd opened 18 months ago. There were text messages Augustus had obtained through legal means. The language in them was not ambiguous. She closed the folder. She did not call Clifford. She did not confront him that night or the next. She did something that probably looked, from the outside, like nothing. She called her attorney. She reviewed the prenuptial agreement she and Clifford had signed. She restructured 2 Mercer Holdings accounts that listed him as an emergency contact. She made quiet changes to the document hierarchy on her secure server, and then she waited. Not out of indecision, out of precision. She was not a woman who moved before she was ready. The Vantage Group acquisition was Clifford's biggest deal to date, or it would have been if it had been real. He had been pursuing it for 8 months. The Vantage Group owned a cluster of commercial properties in Northern Virginia that a development firm like his could theoretically turn into something significant. The problem was the price. The problem was always the price. What Clifford had discovered, or believed he had discovered, was that a company called Meridian Bridge Partners had expressed interest in facilitating the acquisition. Meridian Bridge was an investment group with the right kind of capital and what appeared to be an appetite for exactly this type of deal. Meridian Bridge Partners was a subsidiary of Mercer Holdings. Sylvana had not engineered this. It had simply happened. The way her world had a habit of quietly overlapping with his without him knowing. When one of her analysts flagged the Vantage Group opportunity 6 months ago, she had reviewed it and signed off on a preliminary interest letter. Standard process. She hadn't connected it to Clifford's deal pipeline immediately. When she did, she shelved the letter and said nothing. Clifford must have found it another way. Or rather, she understood later, Edmund had helped him find it. Edmund, who had been calling himself an advisor to Clifford's firm for 2 years. Edmund, who had a habit of visiting the office when Clifford wasn't there. Edmund, who had apparently sweet-talked the office manager into letting him into the file room once, just once, to look for something his son had left behind. That was how the draft had moved. She understood the whole shape of it by the time she stood in that boardroom. Edmund had found the Meridian Bridge letter. He had connected it to the Vantage Group deal. He had obtained Sylvana's internal draft. Through the office manager, through the after-hours server access, she wasn't certain yet, and he had given it to Clifford. He had told Clifford that the deal was as good as done, that all Clifford had to do was walk into that room and present it. Edmund had bragged about it, she later learned. At a dinner with 2 of Clifford's oldest friends, Edmund had said his son was about to close the biggest deal of his career, that he had found the right document at the right time, that a man who knew how to move fast was a man who got ahead. He had not said whose document it was. He had not known, or if he had known, he had decided it didn't matter. After she left the boardroom, Clifford followed her into the hallway. Sylvana. His voice was low, controlled. She recognized that voice. It was the one he used when he needed to manage a situation without appearing to manage it. You didn't have to do that in there. She stopped walking. She turned around slowly. What did I do? She asked. You embarrassed me. In front of investors. In front of my father. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the folder on her desk. She thought about Chicago and Miami. She thought about the office manager who had let Edmund into the file room. She thought about Talia, the young associate who had left without explaining why. "Clifford," she said, "I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." He blinked. He thought she was about to apologize. "Mercer Holdings manages approximately $2.4 billion in assets," she said. "I sit on the board of 4 companies. The Whitfield Tower development, which your firm pitched on 3 years ago, was acquired by one of my subsidiaries 6 months before your pitch reached anyone. Meridian Bridge Partners, the firm whose letter your father apparently found and decided to use without permission. That firm belongs to me, has always belonged to me." She watched the information move across his face. It moved slowly. "The document you presented today," she continued, "was an internal draft that was never authorized for external use. Accessing it without my permission is a matter my attorneys will determine how to address. Using it in front of investors as a binding agreement is a separate matter entirely, Silvana. I also know about Brinley Foss," she said. The name landed in the air between them like a stone dropped from a height. "Chicago, Miami. The credit card you opened 18 months ago." The hallway was very quiet. "I've already spoken with my attorney," she said. "The prenuptial agreement holds. I want you to understand that clearly before anything else happens. This isn't a negotiation." He opened his mouth, closed it. He looked, for the first time in the 4 years she had known him, genuinely lost. "I don't understand. You never told me about any of it." "No," she agreed. "I didn't. That was a choice I made, and I'll carry my part of it. But I want you to think about why I made it. I want you to think about what you showed me in those 4 years that made it feel safer not to." She didn't wait for his answer. The attorneys took 3 months. Edmund Obi hired 2 of his own and spent the first 3 weeks insisting that no fraud had occurred, that he had simply been helping his son, that the document had been misidentified. The office manager, a man named Whitford Baines, who had worked for Clifford's firm for 11 years, gave a statement. The server access logs from Mercer Holdings' IT department gave another. By the end of the 2nd month, Edmund's attorneys had shifted their argument. By the end of the 3rd, the matter was resolved in a way that did not go public and did not need to. Edmund signed a document acknowledging the unauthorized use of proprietary materials. He paid a settlement. Clifford's firm lost the investors who had been in that boardroom. The Vantage Group deal dissolved entirely. Clifford did not fight the divorce. Silvana had expected him to, had prepared for it, but he didn't. He called her once, 3 weeks into the process late on a Tuesday night. She almost didn't answer. "I didn't know," he said when she picked up, "about the company. I didn't know how big it was. Would it have changed anything if I had known?" She thought about that, honestly. She had thought about it many times before he asked. "I think," she said carefully, "that you would have been different with me, but I'm not sure you would have been better, and different isn't what I needed." He was quiet for a moment. "That's fair," he said finally. "That's a fair thing to say." She appreciated that. It was one of the last things about him she appreciated, and she let herself hold it for what it was worth. The Vantage Group properties were eventually acquired by Meridian Bridge Partners. The deal closed 11 months after that morning in the boardroom. It was not the largest transaction Mercer Holdings had completed that year, not even close, but Silvana attended the closing in person, which she rarely did. She sat at the head of the table. Her attorney was there, her CFO was there. 3 people from the Vantage Group side were there, along with their counsel. Nobody in that room had any idea she had once been married to the man who had tried to use her own company's paperwork to make himself look more powerful than he was. Nobody needed to know. She signed her name, Silvana Mercer, same as it had always been on every document that mattered, and thanked everyone for their time, and walked outside into a clear October morning where the trees along the street had gone gold, and the air had the particular kind of sharpness that made everything feel like it was coming into focus rather than passing. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, not reflecting, not triumphant, just present in a way she hadn't been in a long time. Her phone buzzed. Her assistant had flagged 3 new items that needed her attention before noon. She put her sunglasses on and started walking. There was work to do, the same as always, and for the first time in 4 years, every part of the work was entirely hers.